This is episode 11 of the Shame Proof Your Life podcast, the one where I talk about when my mom died. I'm your host and shame coach, Danita Bremer. In this podcast, I tell stories from my life to fulfill a prompting I've had for far too long. I help you tell your story in a way that you see you aren't alone and there's nothing wrong with you. I want you to stop believing the lie you aren't enough so you can live a life of freedom and fulfillment the way God intended. Okay, so if you've been listening to my podcast, you have heard little snippets of this story, but I haven't gone into full detail. And I just I just want to say if you listen to the last two episodes, then you know that I was intending to do a short series on money shame, but what learned more and more is that as soon as I start planning things out, that's when the spirit tells me to go a different direction. So this morning I read the talk by Elder Andersen in the April 2020 conference called Spiritually Defining Memories. And I'm also in the middle of Laura Tremaine's book, Share Your Stuff, I'll Go First. And I'm just noticing this pull to tell this story. So I'm actually a little bit surprised that it took me 11 episodes to get here, although I have alluded to it and spoken of it a little bit in previous episodes. I really just feel like today is the day that I'm going to really slow down and tell you all the parts of the story of when my mom died. So, for anybody who hasn't listened to previous episodes or hasn't heard me tell this story before, I'm going to just do a little recap here at the beginning about setting the stage of what was going on at that time in my life. It was the year 2000. I was about to start my sophomore year of college. I was 20 years old. So I was living away from home with my boyfriend, and I had just started going back to church earlier that year. So my spirituality and my faith and my religion were very much front and center in my life after I had not attended church for about 5 years. And my parents, although they were never married, were going through really what would have been a divorce. So they were struggling. It was a pretty rocky time for my parents, but I was away at college, living a 5-hour drive away from home. So I didn't know all the things that were going on between my parents. I didn't really understand how difficult it was for my mom and for my dad and for my little sister, who was 9 years old at the time. I would learn later more about those things. So I was kind of a little bit distanced from what was going on with my parents, but it was early September. The quarter at school, at college, had not yet started. We were kind of in a summertime period. And my boyfriend and I decided that we were going to go on a road trip from Seattle to the Bay Area to visit his family. He's very close with his family, and it had been a while since he'd seen them, and I hadn't met any of them. And so we thought we would take a little vacation, drive our truck down there, visit everyone, come back home. Right before I left on this road trip, I don't remember if I called my mom or my mom called me, but I was on the phone with my mom, and she was telling me about how hard things were and how my dad was being really difficult and mean, and how sometimes she just wanted to leave and not deal with it anymore, just go somewhere where nobody knew where her and my little sister were. And she was just really, just kind of venting to me. And I had previously played the role of confidant and friend to my mom. I think this was a normal and natural progression of our relationship. I'm now becoming an adult, and and we're now more at kind of the friend level. And I remember feeling kind of helpless, like how can I help her, and not quite knowing what to say. And I just said, "Mom, whatever's supposed to happen will happen, and Heavenly Father will make sure of it." Something to that effect. And even in that moment, I was surprised that those words fell out of my mouth because I rarely, if ever, talked about religion or my faith or my beliefs with my mom. She supported me, she was not against it at all. It just wasn't a normal part of our conversations. And so I remember hanging up the phone and just saying, "I love you. You got to do what's right for you. Whatever is supposed to happen will happen. Heavenly Father will make sure. Mom, I'm going on this road trip. I'll talk to you soon." And that was the last time I talked to her. So fast forward a few days. I can't remember exactly. I think it was like 4-ish days later. I received a phone call in the middle of the night from Sacred Heart Medical Center in Spokane, Washington. I was very disoriented. Again, we were on this road trip and we had been um, staying at each of my husband's family members for like 1 to 2 nights at a time. And so we were on a couch bed with in his aunt and uncle's house when they got a phone call, and his aunt woke me up, shoved the phone in my face, and was like, "You have a phone call." And I was just, first of all, 3 o'clock in the morning, being ripped out of sleep. I was just like, "Huh, what's going on?" And then I hear a man's voice saying, "This is so and so from Sacred Heart Medical Center in Spokane. Your mom has been in an accident. You need to get here as soon as possible." And I don't really remember, but I'm pretty sure he had to repeat himself a few times. And it was pretty hazy. And I'm so grateful for my husband's aunt and uncle who were saviors that day, who not only were willing to wake up to a phone call, but booked some airline travel in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then got in the car and drove us the hour and a half to the San Francisco airport. Oh my gosh, I love them so much. And they will always hold a special place in my heart for the service that they rendered that night. I don't remember very much about the flights, or even really the next year becomes pretty hazy in my memory. But I do remember laying down in the back of the car, and as we approached the San Francisco airport, seeing the kind of orange lights. I remember laying down on the floor of the airport. And one thing that is pretty crystal clear is once we landed in Spokane, can't tell you who picked us up from the airport, but I do remember being in the car and looking out the window, and everything is blue skies and clear except for this one gray cloud over downtown Spokane. And I just remember thinking, yep, that seems pretty appropriate. So when I got to the hospital, my grandpa, who lived in San Diego, and my grandma, who I believe was in Arizona at the time, my aunt and uncle, and I think my dad was there. I'm actually, maybe he wasn't there yet. They were already there and had been there for a couple of days. The chaplain said that it was hard to track me down, and it was because I wasn't married yet, so I have my maiden name still, but I'm with my boyfriend at the time, visiting his family, and, not everybody in my family knew what my boyfriend's name was and who his family was, so I think they had to research a little bit how to track me down. And so anyway, everyone else was there, but my sister and I, my sister, who is 2 years younger than me and was 18 years old at the time, we were the next of kin, and so nobody that showed up could make any decisions. And my sister at the time was in the military, and she arrived even after I did. So we get there, and my mom is in a coma, and the ventilator and, the machines are keeping her alive. She was very swollen. Let me back up actually and tell you what actually happened. So, in an effort to figure out how to deal with my little sister, who was 9 years old at the time, my parents had been going to some mediation. So, I don't quite understand how it all happened, but they were meeting with somebody that was appointed through the court system, I believe, to mediate this separation. And the person that they were meeting with told them to do some things as a family together to make things easier on my little sister. So my parents were trying to be the good adults, and they went to dinner and a movie together, and in the same car, for the sake of my little sister. This is what had been relayed to me at the time. And on the way home, my mom and dad got into an argument in the car, and my dad somehow lost control. He crossed the other lane of traffic. It was just a two-lane highway. No other cars were involved, but he crossed the other lane of traffic, hit um, a dirt embankment, and the car flipped over. He was actually in a little truck, a Toyota truck, and the truck flipped over, and my mom was not wearing her seatbelt. I don't think actually any of them were wearing their seatbelts. But my dad and my little sister were able to crawl out the window, and they just had some bumps and bruises and scratches. But my mom somehow was suspended upside down and had vomited during the accident, and her airways were blocked. And so it also took the ambulance, I don't know, several minutes to get there. I think my mind tells me 6 or 7 minutes. And so her brain did not receive oxygen for that amount of time. The ambulance finally came and then took her to the local hospital, where they airlifted her to Spokane. And so when I arrived at the hospital in Spokane, she was in a coma, like I said, and the machines were keeping her alive. The doctors had told me that when she first got there, they were hopeful that she could recover because she was showing signs of having some reflexes. But one thing I really remember is how swollen her head was. Her head was very swollen, and almost to the point where she didn't even really look like herself. I remember the doctors telling us that it was pretty amazing. She had no broken bones, almost no scratches or bruises. It was just the damage to her brain. And like I said, it was pretty hazy after this. We were staying in a hotel room that I think my dad paid for, but I don't even really remember. I remember like a conference room where the whole family came in and the doctors told us what the options were. But basically, as the week progressed, my mom lost her reflexes, and that was a bad sign. And the doctor said that they didn't think that she would make a recovery. And so we were faced with this option of keeping her on the machines or not. And at some point, my sister and I decided to call some missionaries from our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints, and ask them to give my mom a blessing. So these two young missionaries, don't remember them at all. I remember they were male missionaries, came and gave my mom a blessing, and they blessed her that she would recover. So after this news from the doctors that she likely wouldn't recover, and we were going to need to make the decision to turn the machines off or not, I remember a moment where my sister and I, this is the sister who's only 2 years younger than me, who we were both next of kin and making decisions on behalf of my mom together. She came to me in the hallway of the hospital. I distinctly recall the white tile floors and the fluorescent lights. And she said, "I don't know. I don't know if I believe it anymore." And I had to ask her, "Well, what are you talking about?" And she said, "I don't know if I believe God, if I believe in the church. I mean, these missionaries came and gave her a blessing and said she would recover, and she's not. I don't know what I believe now." And in that moment, I distinctly recall in my mind's eye feeling like I was at the peak of a mountain and that I had a choice, that I could turn around and go back the way I came with my faith and not believe. Or I could move forward one step at a time and believe that this was all happening for a reason and it was within God's plan. It was a very distinct moment for me. And in that moment, I made the choice to move forward with faith. And I think part of the reason why was because of my last words to my mom. It was because of the fact that I brought up God at all with her and that I, in a way, testified to her that I believed that God was watching over her and that he would make sure that everything that was supposed to happen would happen. And in that moment, those words came back to me and kind of echoed around my heart. And I just knew that they were true. I cannot tell you how. All I know is how I felt in that moment, that the words I had spoken to my mom the last time I ever spoke to her were true, and that this was part of God's plan. I don't quite remember what I told my sister, but I hope I said something like, "Yeah, I can understand that your struggle with faith here. I'm going to choose to believe." The next weeks and months and even years were kind of a blur in my mind. I was thick in grief, and my sister had to go back and finish her military assignment. She wasn't there to help. And so I was the one that dealt with basically my mom's estate, which was very small. She had a car, she had some clothes, she had some jewelry, very few belongings. But I had to close her bank account down and um, talk about, just being thrown into the deep end for a 20-year-old girl. That was a growing up experience. And all of the family drama that ensued, like, oh my gosh, I had an uncle tell me that he believed my dad murdered my mom, that it was intentional, and that he used his car as the murder weapon. I had family telling me, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Um, all kinds of opinions flying around. And I was young. I didn't know what I was doing or how to do any of it. It was literally 1 hour at a time. My mom had a funeral. I have zero idea how that got planned or paid for or any of it. I apparently spoke at her funeral, have very little recollection. Like, I kind of have a couple of snapshot moments of like the building we were in, but really, I don't remember anything I said. I don't remember anything that anyone else said. I was just, like I said, in the thick of grief. I had an opportunity for shame. And this episode actually really isn't about shame, but I think it's about how to overcome shame and why I didn't feel shame because I could have felt ashamed. I could have felt like I should have done more. I wasn't there for my mom. I should have known. I shouldn't have gone. Like all these shoulds and shouldn'ts. I definitely could have thought those things, but I didn't take that opportunity. And I believe that in and of itself was a gift from God. I believe that it all happened in a way that I could see the Lord's hand in my life in the moment. I could feel Him with me, testifying to me. It was such, those moments of clarity were so peaceful and so certain that I don't know that a lot of people experience that when they're going through grief. Plenty of shame came after my mom died, but in the actual experience of it, I never one time thought that I should have done anything differently. I have this phrase that I didn't even realize I had until many years later, but growing up, I think I would often think to myself, why not me? So many people ask, why me? And for me, it was, why not me? When my mom died, I thought, people die every day in car accidents and in multitudes of other ways. Why not me? Why not me or my mom or my family? And that actually was very comforting to me at the time. And I think it really did insulate me from judging myself and shaming myself about what I did or didn't do leading up to my mom's death. Okay, so I want to offer a few um, thoughts, suggestions, if whether or not you've lost someone you love and you've experienced this type of grief, I just want to encourage you to tell your story. I have told this story so many times. My kids know it inside out. They know that one of the bedrocks of my testimony in God and in Jesus Christ is that I think I was given those words at that time and they didn't come from me, they came from God. But every time I tell the story, I learn something. It embeds itself, my testimony embeds itself just a little bit more, a little bit deeper. It's so useful to speak your truth, your ideas, your thoughts, your feelings out loud to someone or to no one. And if you're not ready for that yet, then at least write your story down. I promise you, it's so powerful. And then the main lesson that I always come back to, which I think is so fascinating that this lesson was given to me well before I was a life coach, was this idea that I had a choice. Now, I also believe that this was shown to me through divine intervention, that I didn't really do this for myself, but this spiritual moment when I felt myself at the tippy top of a mountain and I could see that I had a choice. That was such a gift to me. It was so empowering to me. It was like Heavenly Father saying, listen, I get it. This is hard. You totally can go back and not believe and not go to church and not have faith. But you also have a choice to move forward and to believe the best. And that was such a gift to me as well. What choice do you have that you aren't seeing? Good and bad, right? And also, what choices did you make that brought you to this point in your life? I think so often we just live our lives somewhat on autopilot and we don't notice where we are making choices that lead us down one path versus another. And every choice that you've made has brought you to this point in your life, good choices and bad choices. But when you see them as choices, you are so much more empowered. The other thing that struck me as I was telling my story this time was the difference between feeling right and feeling good. It didn't necessarily feel good to think that my mom was supposed to die and that was part of the plan, but it did feel right. And it's a subtle but really important difference. So that's something to consider as you make decisions or as you reflect on your life, as you tell your story. When did you feel right? Not necessarily good. And then, of course, where do you see the hand of God in your life? Another lesson that I have learned as I've watched my sister choose a different path than me, which is kind of ironic because I was the one that was inactive as a teenager and she was very active, is that we can never know what path is right for someone else. And this may have been one of the first experiences that I had that showed me that it was right for me to choose faith and to move forward believing that this was all part of God's plan. And it wasn't right for my sister. And that was never my place to decide. That was totally for her to decide, and I'm sure that there was reasons for that too in her life. That lesson has come back to me time and time again. I'll tell you more stories relating to that idea. But for now, I think that is the story I want to tell about my mom dying and my experience with seeing the hand of God in my life. And I offer that to you, and you get to do whatever you want with my words here, my story here. Apply them to yourself. Consider telling your own story and learning from your own memories. That's enough for now, and so are you. Go be you and follow the Spirit. I'd love to connect with you on Instagram or Facebook. I'm at Danita Bremer Coaching. And if you're interested in taking the tips and tools I offer here a little deeper, please visit my website at danitabremer.com and schedule a free session.